Corker, thank you so much for joining us on this ASP chat. We are taking a look throughout the month of January at the transition of power between the Trump and Biden administrations, focusing on Biden's policies as he fills out his cabinet and sets forth his agenda. Let's focus on foreign relations. You were the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and you worked closely with the State Department on matters of foreign policy and diplomacy. So first off, can you just tell us a little bit about what the State Department is responsible for?
The purpose of the State Department is to advance American interest abroad. And as you can imagine, that can fall into all kind of categories. But, typically people would focus on the economic interest of the United States. They would focus on the safety of our citizens. You could expand on that, but that in essence is what it is to do. It's to advance American interest abroad.
Sure. Well, I guess this kind of piggybacks on that. What are some of the various roles within the State Department, and how many people around the world work there overall, roughly?
Well, pretty huge. There's about 69,000 people currently that work at the State Department, and about, I would say, almost half of those are people that are just hired at the local embassies. They're actually citizens in the country that were working, that handle all kind of things. And then we have, I think, about 13,000 Foreign Service officers, and then you have civil officers who haven't gone through the Foreign Service training. And so that's everything from someone being an ambassador, to a country, and they basically speak for our country, to, people trying to get visas to come to the United States. Or you can imagine, I'm sure that if you haven't, of people who are in a particular country and they lose their passports. So there's all kinds of services.
You were chair of the Foreign Relations Committee under President Obama. And when leadership was split, how do we make a united front to both our adversaries and our allies overseas when we have very large political differences back at home?
Yeah, so I served under President Bush, not under. Every president thinks the Senate serves under them. I served with President Bush, for 2 years going on the committee. Basically, I knew nothing about foreign policy. I just wanted to be a better senator for our country. I'd been in business prior to being in the Senate. I served 8 years with President Obama, who, by the way, was on the committee when I came on the committee. He was a young senator also. And then I served for 2 years with President Trump. And so they were all very different. You're right. I became chairman. I was a ranking member. That's when you're in the minority, the lead Republican, for a couple of years with President Obama. And then I became the chairman. One of the things that we really did on the committee while I was there, and I know it ebbs and flows, is we never started anything without it being bipartisan. There was no bill, no resolution that we ever pursued without starting out in a bipartisan place. We try to make sure that we project a united front. Obviously, there are individual senators, that can say whatever they want to say. And so a lot of times, obviously it's confusing to people I know abroad, and we don't speak with united voice. There are differences, but typically on the committee itself, we try to speak. And when I say speak, I'm talking about with legislation that is bipartisan. And by the way, sometimes that bipartisan legislation can be very different from where the administration is, right? I mean, there may be significant differences on Syria or North Korea or something else. So it's difficult. We're in a democracy, and it's so different than sort of the top-down approach that takes place where China, we would meet with their diplomats, and believe me, they were saying exactly the same thing that, the leader of the country was saying. Whereas in our country, everyone has a voice, and sometimes there is confusion in other countries as to where the United States stands.
Sure.
Sorry for such a long-winded answer.
No, okay, it was great.
Yeah.
In your opinion, what's the most overlooked foreign policy challenge today?
This is an answer that has become old. But really, for a country to be strong in its foreign policy, it has to be strong in every way. And I would say that over time, the thing that is going to be very problematic for our country really is the fiscal situation. You hear, generals talk about that as far as our ability to project strength, hard power. But if we don't figure out a way as a nation to begin to deal, it looked like we might deal with it in about 2013, and then that period went by. I think that it's the interior weakness of our nation, one of those being fiscal issues, also division, that the great polarization where it's almost shirts and skins today. It's almost like two parties quarreling with each other nonstop. That is actually the internal issues are our biggest foreign policy issue, if you want to know the truth. I still think China and how we manage that relationship over time, no doubt, is the biggest external foreign policy issue. And I know that's not one that's hidden. Everybody's very aware of it, but it's going to be a challenge with almost 1.4 billion people there. We've got 320 or 30 million people here, and the economic issues, it's going to be a real challenge. History is wrought with problems where a lesser country surpasses another country in size and economic ability. And, there've been a lot of major conflicts that have come out of that. So our ability to deal with that appropriately is, in fact, the biggest foreign policy issue that we have.
It seemed like there was a brief period of cooperation between President Trump and Kim Jong-un that eroded pretty quickly. As tensions seem to rise between the U.S. and North Korea, how should the Biden administration approach that? How should they approach rising tensions with North Korea in a situation that seems to continue to have an ebb and flow?
Well, there was a moment in time when Secretary of State Tillerson, who I was very close to, I didn't know him from Adam until he became Secretary of State, and I helped him through the process, would have coffee with him. There was a point in time when we were making progress negotiating with China, and they were actually closing their border. There's all kind of border crossings that take place between the countries, keeping coal from coming in. I mean, there was a lot of cooperation taking place. Tillerson was making progress. Without being too overly critical, the president basically upended all of that and created this personal relationship with Kim Jong-un that basically elevated him on the world stage, and we got nothing for it. So there wasn't really, sure, if you flatter another person and they flatter you, there's an appearance of love between the two, which unfortunately there may have been actually, but there was no real policy changes that took place. The diplomatic efforts between us and China and other countries basically was totally eroded when that mano-to-mano discussion began, and we got nothing for it, and we're not safer today than we were. We were at a moment in time where we could have been. So that issue is going to continue to be an issue for us and other countries in the region. Japan can be reached easily by a nuclear weapon, and basically we frittered away the opportunity to deal with it at an important time.
Sure.
So President Biden is going to be inheriting the same issue exacerbated because they've continued with their development.
Sure. The Trump administration declared China our greatest national security threat. What specific threats from China caused the Trump administration to make that statement? And do you agree or disagree with that assessment?
No, I agree that it is the most critical issue for us as it relates to foreign policy. I already mentioned the size of the country, their economic growth, the fact that they literally are, I don't like words like this, but literally are stealing our intellectual property. They do it in all kinds of ways where they're taking a valuable asset that's owned by a company and using it to build their own products. They don't allow us to compete on an even basis in their country, whereas we do here. So they've taken full advantage of their status of becoming a member of the World Trade Organization. They haven't evolved. They are a state-run entity. They've gone out into the South China Sea and literally taken almost a magic marker like we used to use and drawn a map around the South China Sea and claimed territory that is not theirs. And they've tried to put in place where you have to identify yourself if you're going to fly over that zone or if you're going to travel through it with by water. So They've been threatened. Obviously, Hong Kong doing terrible things as it relates to human rights there. So they are a threat. The one thing about China is, and any official that you talked with there, and I've talked to many, what they do care they care about stability. They're worried about uprisings. When you have a one-party system there, they worry about uprisings. They worry about people becoming concerned. We at least, even though we're very polarized in our nation, we at least have an outlet, right? I mean, people, and you see it, unfortunately, every day, people quarreling over where we're going as a nation. They don't have that in their country. And so their whole goal is to raise their standard of living, rise gradually. And the fear is at some point, to get to a point where there's a conflict of some sort that cannot be resolved diplomatically. But in the interim, they are taking full advantage of our open society with what they're doing, and it's got to come to a head and be resolved.
Switching to Guantanamo Bay, President Biden's defense secretary has indicated that he will or would like to close Guantanamo Bay. Yeah. First, could you describe for us what Guantanamo Bay is, what we're doing there, and do you think that closing Guantanamo Bay is a good idea, or at least tell us the pros and cons of that?
Yes, Gitmo, as people call it, is not on our territory. It's on leased land in another territory that's not ours, and it's where we housed what is called enemy combatants. These are people that were on the, either maybe were helping engineer the flights that killed so many people back in 2001 on 9/11. The issue was, first of all, being able to interrogate them, and that's been obviously very controversial, but to be able to not let them lawyer up, but to interrogate them to try to find out if there were other plans underway to kill innocent Americans here at home. I think they're down to about 40 people there. It used to have, I think, maybe close to 700 people that were enemy combatants. It's something that may be beyond its time, but there were legitimate concerns on both sides. One about civil rights for the people that were jailed there. There was obviously a lot of arguments about, in our country, should they not have access to due process. But then there were a whole lot of people on both sides of the aisle very concerned about them being released back out into society and wreaking harm again. So it's probably something that we've moved beyond at this point. I think we have a better opportunity now to resolve that issue between the two parties than at any point, because there's been so much time since many of these people were brought into the system.
Senator Corker, one last thing. We were talking before we started ruling about the legislative branch. You've been in the Senate under 3 presidents working on foreign affairs.
Not under 3 presidents.
Sorry, I apologize. Thank you for the education. Alongside, in a different branch, the legislative branch. How does the legislative branch overall affect foreign policy?
First of all, it's always more fun to be chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee when the other party has the executive branch, because you become the lead spokesperson for a point of view. It's much more difficult when your own party. It's not as much. You don't feel like you accomplish quite as much, even though you're working hand in hand with them on getting people confirmed and all of that. It's not quite the same. Look, I was a business guy. I went in business when I was 25. I was, because of civic involvement, I ended up being mayor of my city, where I could create a vision and put the pieces in place to make it happen. God, how wonderful is that for a business person, and transformed our city. When you become a legislator, you have to work with 100 other people in the Senate, 435 people in the House. It is incredibly frustrating. And on foreign policy, just the way our Constitution and our country is set up, there's no question that the administration, executive branch, dwarfs the legislative people. They have so many powers that they can do on their own accord. And so it's an important position. And I'm thankful that I feel like the most blessed person that's ever lived on the face of the earth to have the experience I've had, to have the privilege of serving. But it's a pretty frustrating job, because you're more of an influencer there's not huge amounts of legislation that are done in the foreign policy arena. We did a lot, but there's more in other places like finance or appropriations or something like that. And so sometimes I felt like I was a commentator, explaining to the American people some of the things that we're talking about right now. So again, I thank you so much for letting me talk about it a little bit.
Senator Corker, thank you so much for joining us. This was a real pleasure. We appreciate your insights and joining us on ASP Chats.
Well, thank you for doing what you're doing. It's an important thing for our country to talk about real things and not those shiny objects. And if I can be a participant again in the future, please ask. And thank you all for putting this together. I appreciate it.
We'll hold you to that.
Thanks so much. Take care, sir. Thank you.
Have a great day. Be safe.
Thanks a lot.